Today I'm going to be showing you how you can try out screen printing at home relatively inexpensively. And what we're going to be making is this dish towel that's been screen printed with all the different bacterial shapes. This is the project, one of the projects from the July Crafty Little Club kit, which was Under the Microscope, was the theme of that one. So what you'll need for this project, and is included in the kit, is two 100% cotton flour sack style dish towels. You'll need your paper template, which is provided, as well as a craft knife, which I provided, a squeegee. This is screen printing ink, a popsicle stick, which was used for helping us with the ink, some blue painter's tape, and an embroidery hoop. This is a 6-inch hoop that I've got chiffon fabric in it. So your chiffon fabric will come not yet dyed. I've used this previously. That's a great thing about this, is that you can reuse the fabric numerous times as long as you clean up properly. So mine's already been stained pink, but yours won't have any color yet when it arrives in the kit. There are a few other things that you'll want to gather from home in order to do this project. It's a good idea to grab another piece of just white printer paper, drawing paper, whatever you want, something not too thick that you can see through for tracing. You'll need a pencil. You'll also need a cutting surface. So if you have a cutting mat like this, that's ideal. I know not everyone has those, so another thing that works great is just a piece of cardboard. And so you can, for instance, break open the box that the kit came in and use the top of that as your cutting surface. The screen printing can get a little bit messy, and I'll show you the back here. You can see that actually the ink does come through quite a bit. So you'll also want to prepare your work surface. You want to do this either on a surface where you don't mind if it gets messy, or lay down something to protect the surface, like some paper grocery bags. You'll also want to make sure that you have a damp rag or some damp paper towels nearby when you do this, because like I say, this does get messy. All right, let's get started. All right, and I want to apologize too. I know this, the lighting is not ideal for this video. Unfortunately, my day job and my son have kept me busy lately, so I haven't been able to shoot this during daylight hours. So we'll have to make do with this. The first step is to trace your pattern onto a new piece of paper. The reason that we're doing this step is just so that you can save your original pattern in case you make a mistake while you're cutting, or in case you want to keep making this pattern over and over again. You're eventually going to cut out the shapes, so if you don't trace it and you just cut this pattern out, then once it's gone, it's gone. So it's a nice idea just to trace it first. I just have normal weight printer paper here and a pencil, so you can just work your way around the shapes and trace it. For our purposes, you know, I've got the PDF file of this in lots and can just print more out, so I'm not going to go through the full tracing. So with your traced pattern, the next step then is we want to take the craft knife and really carefully cut this out. One of the things to keep in mind when you're doing your cutting is to be as accurate as possible, because any of the gaps is where the ink is going to go through. So if you sort of go off course and have a big snag or jag in your pattern, then the ink could go through there. I will show you a way that you can remedy tears if you need to, but it's best just to try to be careful from the beginning. So you'll start and just working around the edge, just very carefully using the craft knife to cut out your template. And just keep working your way around until you've got the whole pattern cut out. All right, so once you've got your pattern cut out, it should look something like this. And your next step is going to be, you'll want to put your chiffon fabric into the frame and pull it and tighten it and pull it as taut as you can. I should also mention, so the chiffon fabric here that we're using, We're using this because we basically want something with a very, very fine mesh that mimics the mesh that's used in professional screen printing. So the next step, once you've got your chiffon in your frame and your pattern cut out, is you're going to want to attach it to the pattern. You want to attach it to the outside, the flat side of your fabric, not the indented inside. And so you're just going to use the painter's tape and being careful not to cover up any of the pattern. You're just going to carefully attach the fabric on. I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a very slight gap there at the top. You want to make sure that all the chiffon is covered around the edges. So this is going to be, the ink basically is going to be going through, think of it like a stencil. So the ink will be going through the stencil. So we want to cover anything outside of the patterned area. You'll recall that I had said I'd tell you how to fix a cutting mistake. So depending on the severity, one thing that you can do at this stage is as you're taping your pattern, if you have maybe a little tear or a nick, you can tear a little piece of tape to just cover up the nick so that you don't have to recut the whole thing. 'Cause you know, sometimes it's just as you're cutting that last shape out and then whoops, the knife got away from you. So yeah, just set up your pattern on your frame and try to make sure that all the spaces are covered. All right, so now we're ready to actually get printing. So I've got my work surface, something that I don't mind if it gets a little bit of ink on it. And I've got my damp paper towels at the ready to help with any spills. I've got my ink and my popsicle stick and my squeegee. What I like to do, so in the original design, I've sort of made this go all along one side of the flour sack dish towel. You can of course do any pattern you want. You can cover the whole thing. You can do sort of a random pattern, whatever you want. If you wanted to use just some of the bacteria, you can just put a piece of tape over the ones you don't want to use. So maybe you just want the E. coli over and over again. You could tape up all the rest or just cut out that one and just put that all over the all over the dish towel. What I'm going to do though is show you how to do it in one even row. So what I find easiest, first of all, make sure that you're working on the right side of the dish towel. So you can see one side is the hem is sewn over to the edge. So you want to make sure you're working on the front. And I find it easiest to just work from the edge of my my image is approximately centered in the hoop. So I just work from the edges of the hoop and I put them even with the top and the bottom there. And so what you're gonna do is get a healthy glob of paint. You wanna have an excess for sure. And you're just going to sort of glob it all along one side there. You want to support the hoop pushing down firmly with one hand. And this is where you're going to take your squeegee and you're going to put it over top of the ink and pull it down over the pattern. Because this is a circular frame, you'll probably have to sort of do a swiping motion around the edges instead of just straight down, and that's fine. But what you want to make sure is that the entire time you've got a firm grip on the hoop so that you're not picking it up and putting it back down, because once the ink is spread over top of the images, it's going to be transferring down to the fabric below. So if you sort of adjust and wiggle it, you're going to get smudges in your printing. So just make sure that you're holding it tight. Take your squeegee and you're just going to pull it down with very firm pressure over top of your image. Just making sure that all the surfaces are covered. All right, and once that's done, in one smooth motion, just lift directly up and you can see you've got your pattern printed out there. each time that you do this, you're going to end up with an excess of ink either stuck on the frame still or on the squeegee, and you want to reserve that ink. So you can just take the extra and take your popsicle stick and scoop it back into the container so that you're not letting any of it go to waste. And you'll do the same thing at the finish when you're ready to clean up. So this ink is now wet, so you'll want to be careful then, and aware that you've also got wet ink on your surface underneath, so you don't want that pushing through on your napkin, or sorry, yeah, on your dish towel. So what I do next is move to the other corner. And if you want to, you can sort of rotate the direction of the pattern so that it's not always the same bacteria in the same shape each time. So since your pattern's probably in the center of the hoop, you can sort of line it up the same way. So we've laid it down. We're going to put another smudge of ink across the top. Grab the squeegee, and once again, just drag the ink to make sure that your entire pattern is covered. It does get a little tricky once you've already gotten ink on the surface. You'll kind of have to pay attention to where you've already inked so that you know that you get all the surfaces. Oops, see in there, I wasn't holding down, because I've got ink on my finger, so I wasn't holding down the cloth. And you can see I did get a little bit of a smudge there, so it happens. All right, so this is a good place to show you why we need to keep the damp paper towel. So sometimes a little bit of ink will get on the outside, and it can cause smudging on your transfers or on your prints. So in this case, you can see here there was a smear of ink. So what you can do is just take your paper towel and your damp paper towel and just lightly smooth this, clean the surface of your screen to make sure all the ink is off. And you can just take a blank piece of paper or your scrap that you're printing on or whatever, and just rub it over the surface and just make sure that none of the ink is transferring, so that okay, you've got all the ink off and you're ready to go now. So the pattern here is about 4 inches. There's enough space to do evenly spaced about 5 repeats along the edge. And so what it works best is to do them as spaced out as possible at first. So I've done the 2 sides and the center. And then what we're gonna do is fill in the space in between. So you can lay down your frame in whatever orientation you'd like. If you take a look here, my fingers are starting to get pretty dirty, so this is where we need to start protecting our cloth. And make sure that you are paying attention to what you're touching and not smearing your ink everywhere. You can see there's dots of ink around the frame. So we've laid that down. Once again, we'll do our dollop of ink across one side and use our squeegee to swipe it. All right, but when I laid this frame down, I put my frame on top of 2 slightly wet ink images just on the edges. So you want to remove that very carefully, pull it up, and you can see now there's a little bit of damp ink around the edges where you laid down your pattern. So you want to make sure that you wipe that off before filling in the next blank space, or you're going to end up with those smudges transferring. I think that last one was actually the cleanest transfer. So yeah, you work in, fill in the last blank space, and then you'll want to let this air dry to completely dry before you do anything with it. But once it is completely dry, it should be fully washable. As for your equipment, the screen itself is totally reusable, but you do need to clean it right away. You don't want to let the paint dry on at all, because any little bits or crusts of paint that dry on there are going to affect your future prints. The chiffon fabric though is relatively inexpensive, so you can go and buy more if you needed to. As for the paper pattern, this is why I had you trace it as the first step, because the paper pattern can only be used for one printing session. You can see it's getting pretty saturated already, so you're not able to keep reusing this, so this will just be taken off and thrown in the garbage. For everything else, you can just scoop your paint back into the jar and wash your squeegee and your fabric with warm water. Let it dry, and you're good to go for next time. You do want to make sure that your screen is 100% dry before you use it again, because any water that's left on that is going to affect your transfer and cause problems. So there you have it, a great way to try screen printing inexpensively at home.